Welcome to episode 318 of Stuck Mic AvCast. I am so excited, and I'll tell you why. We have somebody coming on the show from Australia, and it's somebody we haven't had on in many years, almost, about 10 years. But you know, Australians are truly passionate about aviation, and one of the most passionate aviators and AvGeeks out there that I know is Grant McHerron. Grant, along with Steve Visscher, is the host of Australia's longest-running aviation show. And by the way, speaking of Australia, did you know that we actually have a lot of scholarships for Australians in our scholarship guide? And you can get one of those for free by going to aviationcareerspodcast.com/payitforward, or you can just hit the pay it forward button on the right screen here at Stuck Mic AvCast. And this episode actually is sponsored by somebody who actually got their pilot certificate down in Australia. And that sponsor is the law offices of Robert M. Strumer, LLC. And you can actually find them at www.strumerlaw.com, and they're giving away 100 of those scholarships guides. You can get that one for free by using their coupon code Strumer Law. The law offices of Robert M. Strumer, LLC, handles various aviation matters, including FAA safety investigations and pilot medical certification. Again, you can find them at www.strumerlaw.com. And if you're looking for a scholarships in the U.S. and abroad and in Australia, you can go to Stuck Mic AvCast, click on scholarships, and don't forget, you can get one for free. Go on aviationcareerspodcast.com/payitforward. Well, again, today I have someone with me who is, like I said, one of the most passionate aviators I've known. And we actually haven't been able to actually meet up yet, but I've been listening to his podcast for years and all the content he's done. And he's actually been somewhere I haven't in the U.S., and that's over in up in Oshkosh. Welcome to the show, Grant. It's wonderful having you on today.
Thanks, Carl. It's great to be here, mate.
Yeah, they one of the things that we have to correct me on is I think I may have said it wrong, but like I said, Melbourne is over there. Melbourne is, I think, how you folks say it.
It tends to come out there. We talk about Brisbane and Melbourne, whereas in America it's Brisbane and Melbourne, and Melbourne is Florida, Brisbane is San Francisco.
Absolutely. Great point. Well, hey, Grant, you know, one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on here is over the past decade, since I think we last even spoke, is I've been working a lot with Australians, and that's in our sister podcast. And one of the things I've noticed about Australians is they're incredibly passionate about aviation. And one of the reasons I think, and this is what someone has told me, is that there is an incredible impact of aviation on the society in Australia, both from a commercial standpoint and from a personal standpoint. So one of the things, instead of putting words in your mouth, one of the things I'd like to know is, you know, what do you feel is the feeling in Australia as far as the impact of aviation on people's lives?
I think a lot of people take it for granted. We've got, there's a number of governments, local governments, state governments that get it, but there's a lot who don't. Australia is about the size of the continental United States. So to drive from Sydney to Melbourne, up the, down in that case, Sydney down to Melbourne, down the Hume Highway, is a solid 8 to 10 hour drive, depending on how you pace it. Whereas you jump on a jet and you fly up, and all up, you're looking at an hour in the air and an hour either side, that kind of thing. So there's the Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane triangle, they call it. It's the Golden Triangle here in Australia. So flights from Melbourne to Sydney, Melbourne to Brisbane, and vice versa in the commercial sense. It's some of the busiest airways in the world.
And that's actually moving people through this large country and long distances. One of the things that I also have learned about Australia is the fact that, and of course there's a TV show about it, but the fact that it's so important for the lives of Australians in very remote areas. And maybe you could kind of give us a little color on you know, what do we mean by remote?
Okay, we're talking like a classic phrase. I picked up a hot air balloon in Sydney, was driving through Wagga Wagga, we just call it Wagga, to pick up a friend who was going to be crewing with me, and then drive across the bottom of New South Wales, one of our states, to Victoria. And you know, the GPS said in something like 378 kilometres turn left. And that was, we used to have a one-family property in New South Wales that was bigger than the state of Texas.
Wow.
Australia is big, And once you get past the edges where a lot of the civilization is, we call it the big empty. And when you start getting into rural Australia, you can drive for a day and only see one car in some areas, especially in some of the arid areas in the middle. So aviation is critical in the rural areas, and some governments are starting to wake up to the idea that if we make aviation better, if we make it more appealing for people to be able to get out to our airports and so on, we'll get more people from the big cities. We'll get more people from the coastal lands to come inland. Your doctors, your tradies, all the various groups that you need to make a civilization and make your rural towns boom. Aviation helps support that. We've got the Royal Flying Doctor Service. That's huge in the outback and the rural areas. You'll see PC-12s and King Airs landing on roads to do pickups, talking to some of the guys who fly with them. And they've done the famous land in a farmer's field where they've got bales of hay on fire to mark out as a flare path down the runway, things like that.
So that Royal Flying Doctor Service, by the way, is what I kind of alluded to in the beginning there. And there's actually a TV show that is quite fascinating. My wife loves it. And, I'm wondering if you've gotten to talk to these people, how does that reflect their actually lifestyle of these people that are out there flying?
Well, you get some of the folks out doing some of the tourist flights out in the outback in the bush and all that, as we call it. You're living in pretty basic accommodations and you're doing a lot of flying, but it's a great way to build hours. You've also got, with the Royal Flying Doctor Service, you can be living in a major metropolitan but rural area. Some people flying for those services will live in a capital city, but they will spend their days flying out into the countryside.
Wow. And that's actually it. So one of the things that I think is really important for us to understand, and I'm trying to do this so that we in the U.S. can understand Australian aviation, there's a bit of a difference in infrastructure than we have here. And to give you an example, like I actually have an office in an FBO, and it's not unheard of, right? But that actually is different in Australia. When you fly to a fairly small city, are you going to see the showers and the nice FBO with computers and air conditioning?
You might find a bathroom. You will definitely find self-service fuel pumps. If there is an aero club there, you might have a building there that you can make use of if they're open. It's... Imagine you're going out into, I guess, rural Idaho or things like that. I'm trying to remember back to when I lived in the US, but I was mostly in Boston and visiting California, so various other areas. But yeah, that big empty, the flyover states or areas, we've got a lot of that. So an FBO, that's for business jets.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's actually some of the FBOs. Yes, I get it. I'm going to get those comments. They're mainly for business jets in the U.S., but there are so many other FBOs that cater to smaller aircraft, which, by the way, if you want to come visit us here at Stuck Mike AvCast and fly into Lakeland, we are actually located at Aero Center, and they are so wonderful. And you'll have business jets parked next to really small airplanes, which I love that mix. Yeah. It's kind of different than you see in some other places in the world. As far as that is concerned, as far as the FBOs and as far as the infrastructure for general aviation, do you have an opinion as to why that hasn't built up in Australia? Is it?
We're going down this path. The dreaded user fees. We actually did an interview with Dick Smith, an Australian explorer, aviation passionate person. He worked in the precursor to what is now the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. And many call him the guy who introduced user fees and, terrible. But when you actually listen to what he said in the second part of our interview where we talked about being in the halls of power, he basically walked into Parliament and it was both sides wanted it. They said, you must introduce this. So he was given a directive to do so. And user fees, like you want to shoot an ILS at Avalon Airport, just down the road, so to speak, where they host the Avalon International Air Show every 2 years. There's a big air show there. You can shoot the ILS, go missed, and get charged only $25 each time. Wow. Which is, cool, that's cheap. If you touch it used to. Honestly, I haven't looked at the prices lately. That was a while ago. It's probably gone up by now, but they were renowned because they were happy to have people come in. They didn't have a lot of traffic, so they were happy to have people shoot and go missed. But touch the pavement, woo, yeah, every time you touch the pavement, even with a touch and go, for instance, at Moorabbin Airport, a big training airport here in Melbourne, every touch and go will charge you, and every full stop landing will charge you. Flying on the airways will charge you based on your weight and things like that. Not you, the pilot, but your aircraft class and so on. So airways fees are a thing. If you fly in ILS, you're going to get, if you fly in the instrument system, so if you're following IFR, you're going to get charges for that. So everything has a charge. So when they introduced user fees, a lot of people went, oh, I can't afford that. And so they stopped flying IFR. Then it went into visual rules as well, so they cut back. And then what you find is that, we're trying to use these pilots to pay for the upgrades to our nav aids and everything, but there's fewer of them flying. We'd better just put the rate up. And that creates a cascading downward spiral, and fewer people paying for more and more. And if you want a really good example of how user fees are terrible and how some groups actually figured that out, look at COVID, where Australia shut down, and especially down here in Melbourne, where we are the lockdown capital of the world, unfortunately. We even beat Buenos Aires for the most number of days in lockdown. I think it was, it's just insane. But almost, well over a third of a year in lockdown equivalent. And in fact, just one lockdown, I think, was 110 days from memory. But the upshot was that there wasn't a lot of traffic. Airports weren't getting user fees. Airways weren't getting user fees. And air services actually got into a trouble for money-wise, and CASA wasn't making as much money. And, this is what user fees do. So if you're in the US and you hear any stories of user fees, get off your butts, write your Congress critter, write your elected officials, get active, because if you do not, you'll be just like us down here, and it'll kill your golden goose.
You know, Grant, I'm glad you brought that up, because honestly, I wasn't even thinking user fees today to talk about this at all. But I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people come here to the U.S. to do training because of that. You hear about that as far as the cost. That's one of the reasons it's cost so high. There's other ways around paying for the system here, and and air traffic management, et cetera. And I have to agree, user fees aren't the best, and it can cause general aviation to either decline or go away. So with that said, last time we had talked to you was 2013, I think, actually on the show. Where do you see it? Where have you seen it go in the past 11 years?
Okay, so the Recreational Aviation Australia, RAOs as we call them, has become really big. RAOs is for your light sport aircraft, and they are huge. Sure, you can only fly with one other person, but guess what? So many people, they just want to go up on their own or with another person and have fun. And there are some incredible light sport aircraft out there. Smaller versions of the Sling, the Avector Sports Star, all sorts of aircraft. And I know a number of people who have gone into RAOs and learnt to fly in RAOs and have stayed there, but some have gone on to GA. They've transitioned from an RAOs license to what we call a recreational pilot license. So you go from an RAOs certificate to a recreational pilot license. So for RAOs, you just need a driver's license. You don't need to have a full medical like you do CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, who look after the bigger general aviation and beyond, airlines and so on. Once you get your RPL, your recreational pilot license, it's you've got to have a medical. There's all sorts of other things, but that's your gateway then to go for a full GA private pilot license instead of a private pilot certificate that you get from RAOs. But yeah, RAOs is doing great things, and that's been a real boom.
That's great to hear. And how is just maybe an update on Jabiru? I mean, how's that doing? And
yeah, you're still finding them. They're still alive up in Bundaberg in Queensland, which is probably a couple of 1,000 kilometres north of where I live, so to give you an idea. But Jabiru are doing quite well. They're still around. We had Brumby. I think they're still around. I honestly haven't kept up with everything. We did have Gip Zero, doing the GA8 air van and so on. They got bought by Mahindra. Things didn't work out on that front. So one of the founders has just bought themselves back from Mahindra. So we're very hopeful that Gibbs Aero will get things going again.
So one of the things I think is great about your description of this whole situation and the fact that people have actually been able to continue in their aviation journey is you've adapted. I mean, people and Australia has adapted, and it's wonderful to see that there's more people flying. It's but recreationally primarily, which is good that we're seeing that grow. But when you start moving over to quote unquote certified, that like we call in the U.S. aircraft, then there is a big shift. What do you have any idea how much that might be percentage wise as far as costs are concerned? Take a guess, I guess.
Okay, yeah. Okay, the costs definitely do go up. A friend and I jumped in a Cirrus. Evan Shu, he's a friend of the show, been on a couple other shows around. Yeah, a lot of fun. Evan's great. Used to work with AvPlan, one of our local EFB manufacturers, now doing aviation mechanics and progressing towards his licensed aircraft maintenance engineer, or LAME ratings. Not lame, lamey. And yeah, so he and I jumped in a Cirrus and flew up to Tocumwal to catch up with a friend there who runs the Tocumwal Cafe, plug. If you're ever in the area, driving, passing through, living, flying, drop by Tocumwal and the Drome Cafe. It's really good. And Matt and his partner, they do some great stuff. Good food. There's a heritage museum there because Toke used to be the RAAF's biggest ever airbase, and it was during World War II. And all sorts of stuff going on there, so lots of heritage. And my share of that was that flight up, and we did instrument we did IFR out of Moorabbin, went straight over the top of Melbourne, which was cracker. It was a beautiful blue skies day, but we wanted to get into the instrument system, and then flew up to Tocumwal, which is just on the New South Wales border. So it was about less than an hour each way. Came back pure VFR, and my share of that was $400. So that was an $800 hamburger.
Wow.
So $400 hamburger kind of run, except it was a really good toasty. So that gives you an idea of what the costs are. And that was IFR going up and VFR coming back. And that was mostly charged by airtime and fuel.
Interesting. Wow, that's a big difference than here in the U.S. So that's. But the thing is, though, and this is what I'm trying to figure out. Australians seem to be so passionate about aviation, and I'm trying to get my head around this. Maybe I'm trying to glean some things from what you said. It sounds like there's a lot of history there, and it is very important to them. But maybe it's their sense of adventure. I mean, Australians have this great sense of adventure. So why do you think? I mean, I'm again putting words in your mouth. Why do you think people are so passionate about aviation as far as personal flying?
Well, would you believe I just did commentary for 2 days at an air show? So that's one of my side gigs, is doing air show commentary, and out at Sale, which is a town near Melbourne. We spent 2 days, and we had Warbirds, we had the RAAF's formation aerobatics team, the Roulettes, we had some heritage flights, all this kind of stuff, and a cracking, the Frozen Five, they call themselves, five guys flying Tiger Moths. And
that's cool.
It's not the fastest display you're ever going to see, but their starburst at the end has just got to be seen to be believed. And there were thousands of people turned out to see it and be entertained. And there were the RAOs people were telling me that their tent was cooking. There was queues of kids to get into a Cessna to get their photo taken in it. There was a lot of interest being generated, and I think there's a recognition. We've got Qantas, we've got the stories of the Outback, the Royal Flying Doctor. A lot of people know about it. There's still a lot of people who think it's untouchable. They can't make it. So a lot of what I was doing on the weekend was explaining to people with and without guests how this is achievable. I mean, if I can fly a hot air balloon, and I've tried to fly a fixed wing and all that kind of stuff, money got in the way, of course. But it's, if I can do it, anyone can. And we had a lady flying a Bristol light sport, and her daughter was on. And so we were talking about how Lorraine is, like, she's a mother, she's flying, she's juggled life, and she's an instructor and she's winning awards and doing all sorts of great stuff, and getting over to people that it is possible. And you could hear from people afterwards that there's people starting to say, yeah, I think I will give that a whirl. There's something about flight that's wonderful. There's a realization that if you want to see Australia, we're big. Driving ain't going to cut it. When you need a whole day to get between two major cities, then or more. I mean, if you're going over to Perth, that's a multiple day drive from Adelaide, which is a day from here, across the Nullarbor, where you're going to see big empty. Flying's the way to go.
Absolutely. And for those that are interested in getting their pilot certificates, was it CASA is actually one of the ways you can find out more. But just listen to Plane Crazy Down Under, because you'll find out so much more that way. And just listening to people's stories about what they've done in the recreational flying world. We tend to call it affordable aviation, the recreational pilot certificate, and it is so cool to see that this is really growing in Australia and also here in the United States. And one of the things I'd love people to do is just go ahead and check out, the podcast, Plane Crazy Down Under, and it's more of a U.S. centric here. Well, maybe someday you want to go down and get your pilot certificate. And like I said, we had somebody actually go down there, Chris Pazzala, who's a big sponsor of the show, and it was a challenge getting his pilot certificate. I'd like to see more people do that.
It's a different world down here. Night VFR, that's a separate rating. RA Oz down here, it's daylight. It's you get endorsements to go cross country, to get your radio operations, to work in controlled airspace. Many RA Oz aircraft can't operate in controlled airspace, so you have some training that was done in cities, and they actually had to have special waivers. You have to be a member of that school flying their aircraft to be able to operate. They're trying to work on that. CASA says at the moment you shouldn't really operate in controlled airspace unless you have a medical. So there's all these sorts of things that go on. And here in Australia, the second most regulated industry is, first is finance, the second is aviation. And I used to work with a commercial hot air ballooning company in the office of the chief. I became the office of the chief pilot, maintenance manager, operations manager, all that kind of stuff. So I got to know the regs pretty well, and the cost of compliance is pretty high down here. So coming down here to get your license, it opens up an amazing country to explore, but you've got some hoops to jump through, as your friend found out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the RAL, the recreational aircraft license, I think is a really cool way to go, especially, moving down to Australia. And, I have a lot of friends that want to go down and fly there. But regardless, if you want to go fly, go rent an airplane. In other words, have someone take you up in Australia and just check it out. I mean, I think that's a great avenue there. You touched on this before, and you said something about getting your license. I'm curious, what was your journey like, and why did you get into balloons, and is that where you wanted to go?
It was almost like the classic joke about how did you get in ballooning? Oh, this guy said, here, hold this rope. It's almost like that. So my father's former New Zealand Air Force, so I grew up around flying, always loved aircraft, and decided to have a go at my pilot's license. Had a young kid. Was running an IT company. The bubble burst, clients disappeared. There goes the first attempt just before I was about ready to go solo. The second attempt, both of these were with GA in the CASA world. The second time I realized that, I'm going to have to pay for my son's flying. This is going to cost me a fortune. So I parked it again. And through a gentleman came in from Argentina, Nick. Because I used to live in Argentina at one point, so for just a couple of years with business. So he and his family were imported to Australia to fly hot air balloons over Melbourne, because Melbourne is one of the only cities in the world, if not the only city in the world, with regular daily scheduled hot air balloon flights over the city.
Really?
Yeah. A combination of winds. The gentleman who started it, Chris Dewhurst, he was the first man to fly a hot air balloon over Mount Everest. He was supposed to be second, but he got bored waiting for the guy who was going to be first and released because he was getting bashed around by the winds. So he released and wound up going forwards. So, whoops. But Chris is a lovely guy, a lot of fun. I've worked with him and interviewed him. You find him in our back catalogue. He started hot air ballooning over Melbourne back in the 80s. And he said the two things that really helped, one, his brother was in I think it was his brother was in air traffic control, and another family relative was in council. So a lot of the problems were alleviated. And since then, it's become something that happens so much. It's every single promo thing, sponsor advert and tourism you'll see for Melbourne and for Canberra will show hot air balloons. It's just part of the world that we do. And so Melbourne was the first. I used to actually work for Balloon Sunrise, but Nick got imported to work as a pilot flying over Melbourne because it takes a big challenge. You've got to be a very good pilot to fly over the city. And because while I was in Argentina, I got married to a lady over there, we came back here. Her sister used to be married to a guy who was related to Nick's now ex-wife. And so we joke, because my ex-wife, his ex-wife, all this, we joke that we're related through 3 or 4 failed marriages. But when they came out, we caught up and we helped them out when they first arrived. You know, this is what the world's like in Melbourne. And Nick learned to fly in fixed wing, like in Pipers back in England. I think he was flying in Cubs and then got into ballooning. And so one day he called me up and he said, "Hey, come for a fly." And I loved it. It was great. I did another flight sometime later, and a while later he calls me and says, "Do you want to make some money on the side? We need extra crew, especially on weekends." So I became hot air balloon crew. Whenever you see a balloon flying, there's always someone chasing madly, emphasis on madly, in the vehicle to try and get to them either before or just after they've landed. Because unless you get box winds like you do at Albuquerque all the time, and I've only seen it once or twice in Melbourne, where you can actually fly in one direction, go up, come back in the other, and if you fly it right and do it right, you can land where you take off or very close to. That's called box winds. Almost never happens. It's like you're always doing an outlanding. So you're taking off in a field here and you're landing in a field over there. So you need your crew. They're also quite helpful as you're flying along going, "I think I'm going to land in that field." They'll go talk to the landowner if they can find them. Or after you've landed, you try and keep the balloon inflated. And a farmer says, "Oh, not that field, do the next field," or "No, not my property at all." And landowner relations is huge in ballooning. So I crewed with them for a while, and then I injured myself off the field and couldn't crew. And one of the companies I was doing some crewing for, they asked me to come in and help them out with their office and sort out their booking system and all this kind of stuff, which I did. And then I wound up doing all the admin for the chief pilot. And then during that time, I got my private ballooning certificate. And then I got my maintenance authority, and I got checked out by CASA to be the approved maintenance manager for that commercial operation and all this kind of stuff. And it was amazing. That was how I got into ballooning. And I still love fixed wing and rotary and would love to get into that. But, my cunning plan for world domination through lotto win hasn't quite occurred yet. And, it's always out there.
Well, we'll definitely see you in the air when that does happen. But
for sure.
But with that said, I mean, and some people do this, like later on in life, they get their recreational license, or and that might be an avenue for you, because you're somebody who's so passionate about aviation. And the cool thing is, and one of the reasons I want to ask you about this is that you're still keeping your passion alive. You're doing it through ballooning. You're still out there. You're doing the podcast, and you still get a chance, with Evan Shue to go flying. And I think that's terrific that you're able to do that. So just get out to the airport, and you'll wind up doing some aviating.
Oh yeah, my now wife's grandfather, he took us out to Murwillumbah Airport, near where they lived. And he was well known out there. He had his own little aircraft that he flew off a strip in his property. They used to have a big sugarcane property, and he'd made a strip in one of the fields. And so he'd fly as, it wasn't a Kit Fox, but it was like that. So he took us to a place called Moth Care, where they specialise in restoring 1920s, 1930s de Havilland moths and doing all the woodwork and so on. And I was talking to them, and they said, they were like, "Man, you've got the bug. You've got to get yourself in the air. Just whatever it takes, just do it." And it was only about a year or so later I wound up flying balloons, getting into the ballooning industry. You never know what's going to be the inspiration, but don't rule it out. It's not impossible to fly. If I can fly, anyone can fly. And yeah, you have to focus. You have to do a bit of concentration. You may have to, but you've got to prioritize some money here and there and skimp on, don't buy that slab of beer, mate. Put it into your flying. That'll also help you keep kilos out of the cockpit.com, that kind of thing. and yeah, just get out there and do it. And it's amazing. When I'm flying, I know I have to focus on the flight. I have to concentrate on what I'm doing. So all those hassles in the world, they disappear. Once I start thinking I am about to become, do some of that pilot maverick, if I'm allowed to say that. Once I get into that mood and that mode, everything else stops. And you don't rush, because rushing leads to accidents. You miss something. Always here in Australia, you're taught every single flight pre-flight. If you did your pre-flight in the morning and you fly somewhere and you have a hamburger and then you get back in, do a quick pre-flight. Always do it. Always check. Especially here, you don't know if something's, wasps have gone up the pitot tube. That happens. And yeah, all that kicks in. You start taking your time and you get into a different space and the rest of the world disappears and you get up and fly. It's great.
It really is a way to escape, especially if you're involved in a job that's high stress. It makes you forget. And I think that's common throughout aviation. And, I can't wait to get up in the air. I mean, once I get in the airplane and close the door, start the engine, it's like, leave the world behind. Now I'm in this amazing new world and able to just, I'm looking out the window right now at the beautiful blue sky and puffy white clouds and people taking off and landing and saying, gosh, I wish I was up there right now, but I'm doing the second best thing about aviation. That's talking about it.
Yeah, which is what I say when I'm doing commentary. If I'm not one of the people up there flying, I'm doing one of my favorite things, which is I'm telling you about aviation.
So speaking of talking about flying, one of the things that you started a while ago was this Plane Crazy Down Under. And I think absolutely love the podcast. I love the guests that you have on. From my perspective, it covers a lot of different avenues in aviation, a lot of different aspects of it. So, for me, the listener, I hear general aviation, I hear a little bit of commercial aviation, a lot of air shows. So that's from me. Those are the things that I listen to. In general, what do people come to Plane Crazy Down Under for? And I guess, why did you start the podcast?
Well, my good friend and co-host, Steve Visscher, couldn't be doing the show without him. He is a legend, and his ability to edit audio now, well, we both were on a learning curve when we started. We were listening to a lot of aviation podcasts back in 2007, 2009 area. Of course, the Airplane Geeks. We had Joe with, he's long since gone. There's so many podcasts, and Tupper with Airspeed. Of course, the Uncontrolled Airspace guys. All those podcasts, the Student Pilot Podlog, that kind of thing. And we decided, a few of us who were listening down here, like a whole three of us, Steve and Pam, Steve Visscher and myself, decided to get together at Moorabbin Airport, where the Royal Victorian Aero Club has a bistro. And you can sit out there and watch the aircraft while having food. And if you're not flying the rest of the day, have a beer. And it's cracker. So we met there for lunch as a meetup, listeners meetup. So we went to get a photo of us in front of the Moorabbin Air Traffic Control Tower, and Steve and Pam was setting up. He's a great photographer, videographer, and he was setting up the tripod and all that. And Steve and I are standing there, and Steve said, we both already started contributing stories to the Airplane Geeks, and he said, we should start our own podcast. And yeah, we created Plane Crazy Down Under, and our original logo was him and I standing there in front of the tower, one of Steve and Pam's photos. And Steve and Pam's still helping us out here with photos and videos. But yeah, that was back in 2009, somewhere around July. We did our first episode. The first 4 or 5 are just extensions of the Australia Desk news reports that we used to do. But we realised soon that news dates, so the Australia Desk is good for talking about news stuff, and we still make the occasional one here and there for the Airplane Geeks. But we realised Steve really wanted to make an audio magazine, and so variety and content and so on. And we'd had a couple of guests on, and I reached out to Matt Hall. And Matt Hall is the current reigning Red Bull Air Race champion, because he'll be the forever reigning Red Bull Air Race champion, because there is no more of that. They're hoping to resurrect something like it, and they're doing some amazing stuff with virtual reality, augmented reality. Amazing. But I reached out to him and said, hey, do you want to come on the show? And it was right when he was looking for some publicity and all that. And he said, sure. And everything just went crazy from there, because Matt's former Air Force, Rafi, used to fly Hornets. A lot of fun, and we had a blast chatting with him. So Matt's been with us on and off as an interviewee for a long time. We've had politicians, we've had maintainers, we've had airline owners, all sorts of people from all walks of life. And there's a story out there. We've got a queue of people that we're wanting to get on, and it's just the hardest thing at the moment, and the reason why we pod faded in 2017 is the work, the day jobs. Steve was transitioning through some jobs and was busy with that and ran out of energy. I was very flat out doing what I do these days. So, yeah, we pod faded in 17, and then finally we talked about it, and finally the stars aligned, and we restarted Series 2 at Avalon Air Show last year. So we've done about, I think, 15 episodes. I'd have to look it up. It's in Series 2. But, yeah, we just love finding people. There's so many people out there with amazing stories, and when you get somebody emailing or connecting with you and saying, oh, I got back into flying because of you, or you inspired me to go and get my license, that just blows. You get one or two a year, and that's it. That makes it all worthwhile.
It absolutely does, and that's why it's great to hear feedback from people. Please email and get on there and contact the folks at Plane Crazy Down Under, because that's why we do this. We're passionate about it, and it's just something we love to do. As a matter of fact, one of the things I really liked about the fact that you did pod fade just like we did it because of a medical issue, is the fact that when you came back really strong, and one of the people that you brought on was a person that I really admire and is one of the most passionate people in aviation. That's Owen Zupp. I mean, Owen is just an incredible gentleman and an amazing aviator and storyteller. And you can tell he loves aviation.
Oh, totally. Zuppy's amazing, and he was also a big inspiration. Our second episode of the new series was talking with him on resilience. And everything from being a pilot with Ansett when it went under, and how he kept everything going then, he had a major medical situation, and getting through that and getting back into it, and he's now flying again as an airline pilot. And Zuppy was also there when Steve had his major medical last year, Owen and a number of other folks that we've got to know through the show were there really helping Steve get through a very major life-changing event. Most people if you follow the show, he had a heart attack, joined the Zipper Club, multiple bypass, all that kind of stuff. And, there was a big outpouring from the audience and from guests and so on who were there to help him along. Yeah,
and it's great to see he's doing much better, and we're so excited about that.
Yep.
That brings up a very important point, though, about aviation. This thing that we love, this passion, this hobby, this, for some of us, this job, the most important thing in your life is your friends, your family, and your health. And it's funny how the podcast sometimes reminds you of that. And, we haven't really told much about our story as to why we paused. We're actually getting around to that. I think when you put it behind you, it's easier to talk about. And we are going to come up in an episode. I know people have been asking me to do that. But it really is the thing that the bond that brings us together is aviation, but it's humanity that keeps us together, and that's one thing that I love about aviation. It bonds us in just one way, but it actually is just one part of the fabric that weaves us together as people in this world.
Absolutely. You hear it about Sun and Fun, Oshkosh. We also say it about Avalon and many of the air shows down here. You start coming for the aircraft, but you return for the people, and I'm very lucky to be able to get out and do commentary at multiple events. I've done Avalon. I've done what used to be called Wings over Illawarra, which was Australia's biggest annual air show. And I've done ones where it's just me and a couple of thousand people and a bit of a PA. And out in the countryside. amazing stuff. But I really enjoy it because of the people that I get to catch up with, the air show performers and the organisers and things like that. And it's so much fun just to go out and catch up with these folks and talk flying. Even when the microphone's not on, we're over a beer in the evening afterwards, we're talking flying. It's great.
Yeah, and it is such a small world, and it's so special. Just as an aside, what happened at an air show, even just now at Sun and Fun, which has just passed, my wife, who actually was stationed down in Kiwiland, there I call it, but it's in New Zealand, and that is part of Australia. I'm going to start a fight with that one, I know. That's why I said it.
The Kiwis refer, I was born in New Zealand, and the Kiwis refer to Australia as the West Island because you've got the North Island, South Island, West Island. And the Australians sometimes refer to New Zealand as the 8th state because we've got 7 of them.
Well, and it's fun. I'm just having fun with you, by the way. But what's interesting though is that I live next to a Kiwi here in the U.S. and my wife was able to go out and see this C-130 on skis, and that's actually what she was flying in down to Antarctica, and she absolutely loved it there, and she loved New Zealand, and she asked somebody in a uniform, said, "Hey, by the way, can I'd like to go see that C-130. Do you know if they're still here?" And he said, "Well, I'm the pilot. Of course they're still here. Let me go show you around." And what happens is and that's just one instance, you form this bond now, and forever you get to have that bond, and you keep coming back to air shows, and you keep in touch. And it is one of those things that I love about aviation is the fact that we still, again, through this, we have this incredible bond that weaves us together as a community, as a world community. But it's such a small world, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah. But, I mean, look, your wife was based in New Zealand, where I grew up, and I remember seeing starlifters and so on at air bases because Dad was in the New Zealand Air Force. And one thing about flying in New Zealand, especially in the South Island, is it's a great place to go and do your mountain flying course because all that Lord of the Rings scenery, the big mountains and all that, that's the South Island of New Zealand.
Yeah. And she actually flew into both of the North and the South Island, which is she said they're two totally different worlds.
Yes.
And so we're hopefully planning a visit there, and also to come to see you folks. And another thing I've always been wondering about, and especially where you are, as far as aviation, what's the weather like? Like we talk about in Florida, you can fly 361 days of the year. What kind of weather challenges, or is it just like Florida as far as flying in general aviation?
When you're the size of the continental United States, you get a range. Up north is tropical, so think your Florida scenarios. We get cyclones. You call them hurricanes, we call them cyclones. Same with the Northern Territory. So up the very top end in the north, it's on or near the equator. It's pretty full on stuff. So you get all those varieties. Down here, all the way down the bottom in Victoria and Melbourne, you get a lot of we don't get snow. Our biggest mountain's about 8,000 feet. So you probably call it a hill, especially compared to the Rockies. When I was down and living in Buenos Aires, it was like 8,000 feet, because we've got the Andes, So you've got a big variety. Multiple times here in Melbourne, you're stuck. You can't get out of the Melbourne area because there's low cloud, and the land rises up behind us to the inland escarpments and things like that, and the dividing range, they call it, that runs up the east coast of Australia. So you've got a big variety of weather, and you can get desert and everything. So be ready for anything.
So when someone is looking at coming down to Australia for us in the U.S., where would you recommend they start? Where is say general aviation, recreational aviation big, where someone could maybe go and fly and take up a small plane?
At the coasts, big time. So your major capital cities for each state: Brisbane and Sydney, Canberra, not so much. Melbourne, Canberra does have flying, but there is RAOs and GA, but there's not as many clubs. There's not as much. It's the capital. It's sort of like Washington DC, and we don't have the defence zone and the restricted area and all the hoops you have to jump through to fly from those central airports. But it's expensive and there's not as many learn to fly there opportunities. Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, all got vibrant general aviation activities going on. You start there and work to get your endorsements, your checkouts, your conversions, but definitely don't just rock up and go, hey, let's do it. It's like if I'm going to go over and get a US license, I have so many hoops I have to jump through. And you reach out and you contact people and clubs and organizations that are already doing it. You do some research online, but depends what you're looking for. If you want to escape and have beach life, Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast to the south, like Gold Coast Airport, there's a lot of flight schools there. And talking to one of the schools, they said, yeah, we get these people coming in from Middle East and so on, learning to be pilots, to become airline captains and things like that. And we lose one or two every now and again because you've got the casinos, you've got the beach, you've got the people. The latest. It's like I don't want to call it a little California, but it's that, we call it Bris Vegas down there because it's mad. And yeah, they lose one or two who get distracted by the lifestyle and forget that they're there to learn. But if you're wanting to get rural areas and see some amazing country landscape, start in Sydney or Melbourne and then go inland. Absolutely amazing. I love flying hot air balloons in the country areas of New South Wales and Victoria. South Australia has a lot of vineyards very close, as does up north of Sydney. You've got you've got Williamtown, which is the air base at Newcastle, which is also a civilian operation. And just inland of that, you've got the Hunter Valley. And there's Maitland and Cessnock airports there that are pretty vibrant. Depends on what you're looking for, because you've got such a variety. If you go to Perth, it's the most remote capital city in the world. And airliners have a lot of fun flying to Perth because they have to have a lot of fuel on board for divert. If Perth gets fogged in, it's hours to, it can be a long way to your next available airport. Or one of the ones that you could land at is basically a military base with nothing there. It's bare bones. It's powered up when they need it type of thing. So you're going to be sitting on the aircraft for a while. So yeah, pick what you want, go from there.
Absolutely. That sounds like a lot of fun, actually, and that's trying to make that one of my next adventures. Actually, one of my big adventures, and hopefully we'll see you there, is going to Oshkosh this year.
Oh, I dream. I took my mother, my wife and I took my mother over to New Zealand last year. It's 83. It was a family thing. It was also a... when in 1959, when she was 19 years old, she was the Blossom Queen at a big parade and all this kind of stuff. And they were getting all the old Blossom Queens together. So I said, come on, Mum, it's your turn. I took Dad over to New Zealand for his 50th anniversary of 5 Squadron. Took Mum over. Yeah, I'm still recovering from that. It's not cheap. And that's just across the pond, like just going across the ditch, we call it, to New Zealand. So yeah, getting to Oshkosh, that's a big epic journey. And even if you're only there for a few days, that's a week or 2 weeks of journey that as a contractor, I'm not earning if I'm not working. So, there's a lot of things to add up. I'd love to. There's a few of us who would love to. I was last there in 2019. If I can make it, it will be a miracle and I'd love it, but we'll see what happens.
Well, Grant, you have me beat. I have never been to AirVenture. I've been to Oshkosh and I've flown in AirVenture, but I've never landed. But I've actually, one of these days, I'm going to get it on the ground and actually go to AirVenture. I've been to Oshkosh because, with the flight team, we competed at Oshkosh. But I think that is actually one of those events that brings people from all over the world, just like Sun and Fun does. Yep. But just hearing about these events, I think, is really important. And honestly, that's one of the things I love about, your show, Playing Crazy Down Under. I, along with others, can live vicariously through what you're doing at these different air shows. And that's where, bringing a kind of a video element's nice. There's so many people out there doing some incredible YouTube. Evan Shue, like you talked about, I love watching what he does. And I love watching the videos he does and the pictures he takes. And there's just so many other people that do so much out there, Owen's up and just so many more. Yeah. But to find you at Playing Crazy Down Under, you have it on the, it's going to be all on the podcatchers. How about on YouTube? Do you have a YouTube channel?
Yeah, we do. We're trying to get YouTube versions of our episodes up where they're not talking head. We do the audio with a series of photos and then just the show video and then some more at the end. So it's for those people who use YouTube to listen to in the background, like I do sometimes with music while I'm working. We do post other videos on there occasionally. The fun part is having the bandwidth. Steve's quite busy with his job. I'm flat out with mine. I work in aeronautical information and IT, so I have a similar background to your good self in terms of coming out of IT into aviation, and now I've merged the two. And very happy, very busy. So video takes a lot of effort to do, and yeah, we haven't quite got to that bit where we're churning out video.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, we could never do this without our co-host on Stuck Mic AvCast, Rick Felty, who that's kind of how he got involved, doing all those incredible videos that he did many, many years ago before anybody else was doing that.
Yeah.
And he's the one that edits all this, and he's done a wonderful job. But Plane Crazy Down Under, Grant McHerron, Steve Visscher, they both do a wonderful job. And all the other people on the crew, of course, they're terrific. Everybody, because there's so many people behind the scenes of a podcast. And that's one of the reasons I kind of wanted to have you on, is just to look at this 10 years since, and since, or more than that, since you've been on the show, and also looking forward. What do you think is next for Plane Crazy Down Under?
Well, hopefully a little bit more frequency in episodes, addressing that. Trying to get Steve's schedule. He works nights, and my schedule, I start early in the morning, to align around a guest is tricky. But yeah, trying to bring some more content probably from air shows. We've got a list of people we'd like to be talking to. There's a couple other podcasts here in Australia as well these days, in aviation, On the Step and High Fly Media, all these, the High Fly podcast. These are great shows to listen to as well, especially when you're waiting for us to do another episode. But yeah, look, we're really happy to be back. We're getting people chiming in and going, oh, it's great that you're back and good to have you. And even one or two who said, oh, you're back. We had no idea. Because, yeah, that's the problem with pod fading, is you drop off a lot of everyone's radar. And so we're about halfway to the numbers that we used to get per episode on average. But yeah, we'll be working on that. We'll be doing some videos. We've got a couple of ideas. And otherwise, you can hear my tones as well on the Australian Defence Magazine podcast. Naturally focusing on defence and industry, but lots of interesting stuff there. But otherwise, come on down to planecrazydownunder.com and see what we got.
Absolutely. And by the way, we'll have all those links in the show notes here at stuckmicavcast.com. And if you want to ask us, even Steve, who's not here right now, a question, stuckmicavcast@gmail.com, or go to planecrazydownunder.com and ask a question there. Grant, this has been awesome having you on. And we could actually talk for hours, because there's a bunch of other things I want to talk about as far as Australian aviation. But in general, I think it's just terrific to see you guys back, really putting out great content like you always have. And those passionate voices that we hear, and talking about Australian aviation, but in aviation in general, that you guys really, really love this. And I love the fact that you've been able to meld the two, your passion for IT and aviation into one. And I think that's terrific.
It is good.
Well, thanks again for coming on, Grant. I really appreciate it. And tell Steve next time we'll have to have him on too.
We'll have to get you to either wake up real early or stay awake real late, because like right now he will be firmly asleep, having because it's still dark 30 here. It's just the sunrise has just happened. It's about 7 o'clock because we're going into winter. So I fly balloons. I'm used to mornings. My whole life revolves around mornings these days, whereas his is evenings. So that could be fun.
Okay. So Grant, one of the things that I'm going to admit this in live audience here. Right now it's 1700, 5 p.m. here in the U.S. and where you are, it's 7 a.m.
0700.
0700, yep. Right. And the reason you don't see some of our other co-hosts on today is that I put down the date of the show as the third to record, and that's the third your time, and I forgot to tell everybody that's the second our time, and that was my big mistake. But that happens when we have these different time shifts. But we are excited to have more guests on, and we'd love to have some of our folks come on the show at some point. We'll get up early in the morning. I don't mind. It sure beats doing a red eye. That's for sure. For my day job or night job, whatever you want to call it there. But Grant, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on, and go check them out, Plane Crazy Down Under. If you're somebody that's interested in getting into aviation, if you're in Australia right now and you're listening to us, there's a way to do that, and there's scholarships that are out there. As a matter of fact, we actually have started putting Australian scholarships into our scholarship guide there, and you can get one of those for free through the law offices of Robert M. Strumer LLC, and they have a coupon code out there. It's called Strumer Law. If in general you want to get one of those scholarships for free, or you want to find out how you can pay it forward, go to stuckmikeavcast.com/payitforward, and it'll show you how just $1 a day in our Patreon account, we put all that money towards the scholarships guide, because it's our goal here at the Stuck Mike AvCast and our sister podcast, Aviation Careers Podcast, to be able to give away scholarships guides to everybody that needs one. And we need your help with that. But it's real simple to do. stuckmikeavcast.com/payitforward. And one of the things I really want you to think about is, if you notice that Grant was talking here and I was talking about, we all have our different lulls in aviation. I want you to keep involved in aviation and don't let it wane. It's, even if you can't fly, one of the best ways to keep that passion going is to listen to these shows, watch them on YouTube. But make sure you try to do something every day involving aviation. It might be just walking out to the airport, looking in the sky, trying to figure out what is that airplane that's flying overhead right now. Those are the type of things I want you to do. But keep that passion alive and keep trying to do something every day to move that passion forward in aviation. We'll talk to you next episode. Safe flying out there.